The record begins on day 412 of the Conclave archive, and I am already behind. This is not unusual. The Conclave of Worlds generates more data in a single session than most civilizations produce. In a decade, disputes, counterclaims, territorial filings, champion registrations, it streams in without stopping, and my job is to catalog it, tag it, assess it, and move on. I am good at my job. I have been good at my job for 31 years. I do not get attached to data. I want to say that clearly before I say anything else. I do not get attached to data. The Valkyrie filed their claim against humanity on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I remember thinking that large civilizational ultimatums should not arrive on Tuesdays. They should arrive on days that feel heavier. Tuesdays are for minor disputes and administrative corrections. The Valkyrie disagreed with my scheduling preferences. Their claim was simple as threats go. Humanity's outer colonies, 14 of them, spread across 3 adjacent systems, were declared forfeit, absorbed. The Valkyrie had been expanding their territorial boundary for 11 years in that direction, and humanity's presence was, in their words, an inconvenience that had overstayed its welcome. They gave humanity 7 days to acknowledge the claim and begin withdrawal. 7 days. I filed it under Priority Red, which is our designation for situations that historically end in war. I flagged the human delegation for notification. I attached the standard documentation packet, legal precedents, conclave, arbitration options, historical outcomes of similar claims. Then I went back to my other work, because that is what you do. I expected humanity to file a counterclaim. Every civilization does. There is a process. You register your objection, you present your champion, you demonstrate civilizational standing through whatever metric your species excels at: a combat record, philosophical output, theological weight, sheer military presence. Conclave weighs it. A resolution is reached. Someone loses something. That is the process. Humanity did not follow the process. On day 2 of the 7, their delegation submitted a single document. It was not a counterclaim. It was not a legal filing. It was a champion registration form filled out in handwriting, actual handwriting, ink on paper, which is so rare in these proceedings that our scanning system initially flagged it as an anomaly and routed it to the wrong department. I retrieved it from the wrong department. I read it. The champion's name was Dale Kovacs, age 63, profession as listed retired. Previous diplomatic experience none. Listed combat record none. Listed under the field marked civilizational achievements someone had written in that same unhurried handwriting. Got pretty good at listening. I stared at that form for longer than I should have. Then I cross-referenced it against human databases because I am thorough and because something about the form made me want to be very sure I was not misreading it. Dale Kovacs, 63 years old, from a mid-sized human city called Duluth, which apparently sits next to a very large lake, 32 years, delivering mail for his local government postal service. Retired 4 years ago, volunteer crisis counselor for the last 11. One notable incident on record: a standoff on a bridge 6 hours long, resolved without injury. The official report noted that Kovacs had used, quote, non-standard methods and that those methods had consisted primarily of sitting down on the cold bridge railing next to the individual in crisis and talking about his dog. His dog had been dead for 3 years at the time. He talked about it like it was still alive. The individual came off the bridge. I read that report twice. Then I filed Dale Kovacs registration and went to watch the arrival footage because every champion arrival is logged visually and it is part of my job to catalog it. The other champions arrive the way champions always arrive. The Valkai sent the Undying Blade. Title not a name, though by this point the title had been held by the same individual for 40 years, which tells you something about what 40 years of VOK championship does to a person. 7 FT of engineered physiology, 17. Confirmed territorial resolutions. Wearing ceremonial armor that our sensors registered as containing an embedded weaponry to level a city block. The blade stepped off the transport and the dock went quiet in that particular way that happens when something very dangerous enters a room. The Theshan choir sent the voice that sundered moons. The voice was bioluminescent, meaning it produced its own light, soft and shifting blue, cycling into gold, and it moved like something that had never once in its long life been in a hurry because nothing had ever been able to make it hurry. Its record of civilizational disputes resolved stretched back 3 centuries. It had ended 2 wars by singing at them. I do not mean that metaphorically. It had sung and the wars had stopped because something in the harmonic frequency of the voices register affected the neurological decision-making of most known species at a physiological level. When the voice arrived, 6 junior archivists in my department reported feeling an involuntary urge to cry. They filed it as a workplace incident. I told them to drink water and get back to work. I did not tell them I had felt it too. Then Dale Kovacs arrived. He came off a standard passenger transport, not a diplomatic vessel, a passenger transport, the kind that makes 12 stops and serves mediocre food in small sealed containers. He was carrying a bag over one shoulder and a thermos in his right hand. The thermos was silver, dented on one side in a way that suggested it had been dropped from a meaningful height at some point in its life and simply gotten back up. He was wearing a jacket that was slightly too large for him, the kind of jacket that has been worn so long it has stopped being a piece of clothing and started being a condition. He stepped onto the dock. He looked around. He located a junior official from the human delegation and said, I have the audio. I have listened to it more times than I can justify. Is there a bathroom near here, and is there any chance of real coffee, because whatever they served on that ship is doing me no favors. The junior official pointed. Dale Kovacs nodded, said terrific, and walked in the direction of the bathrooms. The Undying Blade watched him go. I have the footage of that too. The Blade's expression is not something I can read easily. Valkai faces are not structured for the range of human expression, but I have shown this footage to 17 different xenolinguists, and they have reached a rough consensus. The Blade was confused. Not threatened, not dismissive. Confused. The particular confusion of something that has walked into a room and found a piece of furniture where it expected to find an opponent. The galaxy had 7 days. I filed my first report that night. Standard format, civilizational threat. Assessment, I noted that humanity's champion had arrived without incident. I noted his credentials, or rather his lack of them. I wrote in the summary field that the Valkyrie claim appeared likely to proceed uncontested given the apparent disparity between the registered champions. I nearly submitted it. I did not submit it. I do not know why. I have thought about this since. I think it was the form the handwriting got pretty good at. Listening, written by someone who saw no reason to be ashamed of it. I flagged the report as pending and went back to the footage. Dale Kovacs had found the vending machine. He was standing in front of it, with his head tilted slightly to one side, reading the options with the focused attention of someone who has decided this is the most important decision of the immediate moment. His thermos was under his arm. He selected something, waited, collected it, looked at it and nodded once, not with satisfaction exactly, more with the resigned acceptance of someone who has made their peace with the available options. He sat down on a bench nearby. He drank his coffee. Around him, the conclave of worlds was spinning up for the most significant diplomatic session in a decade. 17 civilizations, 14 disputed territories, champions who had ended wars and leveled cities and sung entire armies into laying down their weapons. Dale Kovacs drank his coffee and watched the foot traffic go by with the calm, unhurried attention of someone with nowhere better to be. I watched him watch it. The undying blade passed through the corridor 20 minutes later, flanked by 6 handlers and wearing full ceremonial armor at 9:00 in the morning. Because the blade was always performing something, it passed the bench where Dale Kovacs was sitting. Dale looked up. He raised his thermos. The blade stopped walking. Something passed between them. I do not know what. The cameras do not capture whatever it was, and I have reviewed the footage more times than I should have. And then Dale Kovacs smiled. Not a wide smile, not a political smile. The small, steady smile of someone who has already decided how this goes and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. The blade did not return the smile. Blade turned and walked away. That night I received a message from the Valkyrie delegation. Unofficial, routing through third-party channel. It asked without asking directly whether the human champion registration could be considered incomplete and therefore invalid. I wrote back that the registration had been accepted and processed per standard conclave procedure. The message I received in return was not polite. I filed it under priority yellow and went to sleep. In the morning, there were 4 more civilizational claims filed against humanity. In 5 days, there would be none. I did not know that yet. What I knew was that Dale Kovacs had arrived with a dented thermos and a form written in ink, and that for the first time in 31 years of archival work, I had not submitted my nightly report. I did not know what that meant. I was beginning to suspect it meant something. The morning of day 1 at the conclave, I positioned 3 additional recording units in the main arena. This was not standard procedure, I told my supervisor. It was a calibration exercise. My supervisor did not question this because in 31 years I had never given anyone a reason to question my calibration exercises. It was not a calibration exercise. It was that I wanted to see clearly The Valkyrie filed for formal arbitration at 7:00 in the morning, which meant the arena session would begin at 9:00. Formal arbitration under conclave rules meant the two registered champions would meet in the primary chamber, present their cases through whatever means their civilization favored, and the presiding Council of Seven would render a judgment. In practice, this meant combat about 60% of the time, philosophical debate about 25% of the time, and something categorized in our records as demonstration of civilizational character the remaining 15. That last category is the one that causes archivists the most trouble. It is the category where things happen that do not fit the other two. Dale Kovacs arrived at the arena at 8:52. He was wearing the same jacket. The Undying Blade arrived at 8:54 in a formal procession. Handlers arranged a 7-point ceremonial formation, carrying a weapon that I will not describe in detail, except to note that our sensors registered it as capable of penetrating 6 in of reinforced alloy, and that it had a name in the Valkyrie language that translates loosely as the word that ends the argument. The arena seated 400. Every seat was occupied. Feeds were running to 6-star systems. I know because I checked the viewer count and then checked it again, because the number seemed too large. The presiding council called the session to order. The Blade rose, made the formal declaration of claim in a voice calibrated for maximum acoustic impact. 17 sentences, each one landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. The council turned to Dale Kovacs. Dale stood. He said, before I respond formally, would it be all right if I asked a question, just one? The council conferred briefly, under conclave rules pre-response. Clarification was permitted. They allowed it. Dale looked at the Blade. That scar on your left side, he said. How old were you? The arena went silent. Not the polite silence of an audience waiting. The tight, held silence of 400 beings who have just heard something land in a place nobody expected. The Blade did not move. Its handlers moved, 3 of them shifted position in the way that handlers shift when a situation has left the map they prepared for. The lead handler said something through the internal comm system, low and fast. I have the audio. It was a warning to the Blade not to engage with misdirection tactics. The Blade heard it. The Blade did not follow it. Young, the Blade said. One word. The Valkyrie language is not built for one-word answers in formal settings. A single-word response in their register carries the weight of something deliberate, something chosen, at the expense of everything that could have come after it. Dale nodded slowly, like he had expected exactly that answer. Did anyone sit with you afterward, he said, or did they just move on to the next thing? The handlers were fully alarmed now. 2 of them stepped forward. The council raised a hand to keep order. The arena was so quiet I could hear the recording units I had set up, their faint electronic hum. The Blade was very still. In 40 years of championship, I pulled the records I checked. The Undying Blade had never been still in an open session. It was always moving, always occupying space, always making the room aware of exactly what it was. This stillness was new. They moved on, the Blade said. Dale Kovacs sat down on the edge of the arena platform. This is not a thing you do in formal arbitration. The arena platform is a designated standing space. No conclave rule technically prohibits sitting on it because no one had ever done it before, and therefore no one had ever thought to prohibit it. Yeah, Dale said, they usually do. He set his thermos on the platform beside him. You want to tell me about it? What followed was not recorded in the official conclave proceedings. The presiding council later determined that the session had entered informal resolution dialogue at the 11-minute mark, which is a classification that allows for confidential exchange, meaning the official record goes quiet. My additional recording units were not official. The session lasted 6 hours and 43 minutes. I have the audio of all of it. I have listened to it many times. I will not reproduce it in full here. I am not sure I have the right to, and I am not sure it would be comprehensible in summary anyway, because what happened in those 6 hours and 43 minutes was not an argument, and it was not a negotiation, and it was not a demonstration of force or philosophy or theological weight. It was a conversation. The blade talked, Dale listened. Sometimes Dale talked, the blade listened. They went back and forth in the unhurried way of two people who have agreed without saying so. That time is not the enemy of this particular exchange. I can tell you some of what was said. The blade talked about being young and being shaped into something that had no room for anything that wasn't useful. Dale talked about his route, 32 years of the same streets, the same doors, the same faces, and what you learn about people when you see them every day, without ever being important to them. The blade asked what you do with that knowledge. Dale said, mostly just carry it. Sometimes it's useful. The blade asked when. Dale said, when someone needs to not be alone in something. There was a long silence on the recording after that, long enough that I checked the equipment to make sure it was still running. It was. The blade said, the colonies your people built in the outer systems, our expansion would have required their removal. Dale said, yeah. The blade said, there are 12,000 people living in the smallest of those colonies. Dale said, 12,431. I looked it up. The silence after that was different from the earlier ones. It was the silence of someone recalculating something they thought was already settled. At the 6 hour and 40-minute mark, the blade stood, not in the way it had stood before, the formal weaponized standing of a champion in an arena. It stood the way a person stands when they have been sitting for a long time, and their body has remembered what stillness costs. It said, I will speak with the High Council. Dale nodded. You want the coffee, he said. I know. It's been a long one. The blade looked at the thermos. What is in it? Dark roast, Dale said. Nothing fancy. The blade considered this for a moment. No, it said, thank you. It left the arena. The official proceedings resumed 40 minutes later to hear the formal withdrawal of the Valky territorial claim. The stated reason on record was procedural reassessment of disputed boundary classifications. 4 members of the press corps filed requests for clarification. The Valky delegation did not respond. I filed my report that night. I described the outcome accurately. I described the method as dialogue-based. Resolution. In the summary field I wrote the human champion demonstrated no measurable confrontational capability, resolution achieved through undetermined means. My supervisor sent back a note asking me to clarify what undetermined means. Referred to. I wrote still assessing. I have not stopped assessing. The day after the Valky withdrawal, 4 new civilizational claims were filed against humanity. Different civilizations, different. Disputed territories, same general posture, humanity's presence in certain regions was inconvenient, and the conclave was the appropriate venue to make that inconvenience formal. What struck me, looking at the filing timestamps, was that all 4 had been in preparation for weeks. They were not reactive. They were not inspired by the Valky situation. They had been coming regardless, and yet all 4 accelerated their filing to within 18 hours of the Valky withdrawal, as if something about the outcome had made them want to resolve their own situations quickly, before Dale Kovacs resolved them first. I flagged this pattern in my internal notes. I did not include it in the official report. I was not sure it was the kind of thing that belonged in official reports yet. What I included instead, at the very bottom of the document, below the formal summary, was a note that I had not planned to write and only noticed I had written after I had already saved the file. It said, subject continues to carry the thermos, has offered it to 17 individuals across 4 days of proceedings. No one has accepted. He does not appear to notice or to mind. I do not know what to make of this. My supervisor did not mention this note. I think my supervisor did not read that far. I thought about deleting it. I left it. That night I pulled the footage of Dale Kovacs alone in the corridor at 3:00 in the morning between day 1 and day 2. He had not been scheduled for anything. Most people sleep at 3:00 in the morning. He was sitting on the floor against the wall near the East Corridor junction, his back straight, his thermos in both hands, not drinking from it, just holding it, looking at nothing in particular in the way of someone who is not looking at the room they are in. He sat there for 40 minutes. Then he got up, went back to his room. And that was that. I watched those 40 minutes twice. I did not know what it meant. I know what it looked like. It looked like someone keeping company with something that wasn't in the room. On the morning of day 9, the voice that sundered moon sent a formal request to the human delegation. Not a challenge, not a claim, a request. It wanted to meet Dale Kovacs privately. I have been archiving conclave proceedings for 31 years. In that time, I have documented 1,143 champion interactions. Not once in any of those records had a sitting champion ever requested a private audience with an opposing civilization's representative before a formal dispute was filed. Champions do not request. That is not how it works. You declare, you posture. You enter the room with your record proceeding. You like weather. You do not send a politely worded note asking if someone has 30 minutes free on a Tuesday afternoon. The voice sent a politely worded note. The human delegation passed it to Dale, who apparently read it over what remained of his morning coffee, wrote, "Sure, happy to," on the back in the same ink handwriting, and passed it back. That was how it was confirmed. The meeting was set for 2:00 in the Afternoon, the Voices protocol team specified a formal reception chamber. High ceilings, long table, the kind of room that is designed to make everything in it feel significant. Dale's delegation passed back counter suggestion. Something smaller if that was agreeable. The Voices team agreed. They met in a supply closet. I want to be precise. It was a room that had been used as a supply closet and had been cleared out for auxiliary meeting use earlier in the session. It had a table and 2 chairs and overhead lighting that hummed faintly. When the room was quiet, it held approximately 4 people, comfortably, and approximately 6 people, if they did not mind being aware of each other. The Voice arrived first. I have the corridor footage. It moved through the hallway in that slow, light-producing way. It had blue into gold, gold into blue, and its protocol officer was visibly troubled by the room situation, typing something rapidly on a communications device and looking at the door with the expression of someone trying to decide how strongly to object. The Voice stopped the protocol officer with a gesture. It went in. Dale arrived 2 minutes later with the thermos. He stuck his head in first, assessed the space, said, "Good room, I like a room you can hear yourself think in." He went in. The door closed. What I have of the next 40 minutes comes from 3 sources: the corridor audio pickup, which is low quality and partial, a written account produced by the Voices protocol officer who was listening at the door and documented what they could hear, and a verbal summary Dale gave to a junior member of his own delegation afterward, which was recorded on that person's personal communications device without Dale's knowledge or objection, since Dale apparently noticed the recording and did not say anything about it. I obtained all 3 through means I will not elaborate on here. The Voice opened by asking a direct question. It was not a diplomatic question. It was not a procedural question. It asked, "What is it that you actually do?" Dale said he was not sure he had a clean answer for that. The Voice said it had watched the Valky session in its entirety. It said that what it had observed did not correspond to any arbitration methodology in the conclave's documented history. It said it wanted to understand the mechanism. Dale thought about this for a moment. He said, "I'm not sure there is one. I just try to stay in the room." The Voice asked what that meant. He said, "Most people, when a conversation gets hard, find a reason to leave. They check something, they remember an appointment, they change the subject. They do not even always know they are doing it. It is just what happens when things get uncomfortable. You find the exit and you take it." He said he did not take the exit. The Voice asked why not. There was a pause long enough to appear in the protocol officer's written account, as I am quoting, extended silence, approximately 20 seconds. Dale said, "Because I remember what it felt like when everyone left mine." The protocol officer wrote that the Voice did not respond to this for a long time. The written account has a single additional note here in smaller writing, as if added afterward: "The light it produces changed. I do not know the right word. It went quieter." I read that note several times. Then I went back to the audio. The Voice eventually said, "The Theshan choir has maintained a territorial buffer adjacent to your homeworld system for 3 centuries. Our position has always been that human Expansion patterns present a long-term civilizational risk. Dale said, "Is that what you actually believe, or is that the argument?" Another pause. "I am not certain," the voice said, "that I have been asked that question before." Dale said, "What would help you figure it out?" What followed was a conversation I cannot fully reconstruct because the corridor audio deteriorates significantly in the middle section. The protocol officer's written notes become sparse, just fragments, words, and partial sentences. Thesha appears 3 times before the wars, appears twice. At one point, the officer simply wrote the word "still" and underlined it, and I do not know what was happening in the room when that was written. What I know is the outcome. The meeting lasted 42 minutes. When the door opened, Dale came out first. He held the door for the voice. The voice came out and paused in the corridor, that blue-gold light doing its slow cycling, and looked at Dale for a long moment. It said in a register I could hear clearly, even on the degraded audio, "Thank you for the room." Dale said, "Any time." The voice went back down the corridor. Dale looked at the closed door for a moment, then he looked at his thermos. He shook it slightly, assessing the contents. Apparently satisfied, he walked in the direction of the vending machine. His delegation caught up with him at the corner. A senior diplomat, a woman named Carol Hines, mid-40s, who had been managing human interests at the conclave for 8 years, fell into step beside him. She said, "How did it go?" Dale said, "Good, I think, good conversation." Carol said, "The voice hasn't spoken in a formal session in 19 days. We needed to withdraw the buffer claim before the council session on Friday." Dale said, "Give it some time." Carol said, "Dale, we don't have a lot of time." Dale said, "It needs to think. Let it think." He looked at her sideways. "Have you eaten today?" She stared at him. "There's a place 2 corridors over that does a decent soup," he said. "Come on." The recording ends there. The voice did not speak for 19 days. On the 20th day, it filed a form withdrawal of the Theshan choirs 3-century territorial buffer claim. The stated reason, in its own filing language, translated to something that does not map cleanly to conclave legal terminology, the closest rendering our translation team could produce was, "The grounds for concern have been reconsidered in light of new understanding." 3 journalists requested comment from the Theshan delegation. The delegation referred them to the filing. The filing said nothing further. I put together my report. Standard language, resolution achieved. Methodology, dialogue-based engagement. Classification pending. I wrote it cleanly, submitted it on time, went home. At 11:00 that night, I opened a new document. Not an official one, a personal file on my own system, in a folder I had never created before. I labeled it simply with the date. I wrote, "I have been studying Dale Kovac for 62 days. I have begun to notice that I am no longer neutral. I do not know when this happened. I am flagging this for supervisory review." I paused. I wrote, "I have not filed the flag." I stared at that for a while. Then I went back to the corridor footage, to the 3:00 in the morning clip I had watched before. The supply closet corridor was empty. Now lit in the same flat overnight light, the same faint hum of the climate system, the only sound the same wall where Dale had sat with his thermos. I watched the empty corridor for a few minutes. Then I closed the file and went to sleep. In the morning, there was a note on my desk from my supervisor asking me to prepare a threat assessment for the upcoming session involving the Kreth. I looked at the note for a long time. I looked at the name, the Kreth. I opened the file. I began to read. There is a moment in archival work when a document stops being data. It happens rarely. In 31 years it has happened to me perhaps 4 or 5 times. You are reading something, a record, a report, a transcribed exchange, and midway through a sentence, it stops being a collection of information and becomes something with weight, something that presses back against you. The Kreth file pressed back. I read it over 2 nights, not because it was long, but that was not why. I read it slowly because I kept stopping, kept going back to the beginning of sections I had already read to make sure I had understood them correctly. I had understood them correctly. The Kreth are the oldest apex predator in the known galaxy. This is not a poetic description. It is a biological classification. They evolved on a world where every other living thing was either prey or obstacle, and over millions of years they became very good at being neither. Silicon-based biology. No pain response, not reduced, not managed, not chemically suppressed. Absent, their nervous system does not carry that signal. There is simply no pathway for it. No social cognition above the level of pack dynamics. Our xenobiologists had spent 60 years trying to determine whether the Kreth had anything that could be called inner life in the way most species understand that term. The current consensus, as of the most recent published assessment, was unknown. They do not negotiate. This is not stubbornness or cultural preference. Negotiation requires the ability to model another entity's position and weigh it against your own. The Kreth do not perform this operation. They are not built for it. They had sent a champion to the conclave once before 40 years ago. That session lasted 11 minutes. The opposing civilization's champion was not fatally harmed, but the conclave revised its safety protocols afterward, and the revision took 3 years. Now they were here again. Their claim against humanity was filed on the morning of day 18, 14 lines of text, standard conclave format, which meant someone had helped them file it. Because the Kreth do not use conclave format unprompted, I noted this in my report. I noted it again in my personal file. Someone had helped them file this claim. I did not know who yet. I was going to find out. The champion they sent was designated Unit 44 in our records because the Kreth do not name their champions in any language we can record. Unit 44 massed approximately 8 tons. I want you to understand that number concretely. 8 tons moving on 6 articulated limbs with a sensory system that detected thermal variation to within a fraction of a degree. It did not eat the same way most species eat. I will not describe the specifics. It arrived at the conclave dock, and the dock crew requested emergency safety clearance before it had moved 20 ft. The clearance was granted. The conclave security team deployed. Unit 44 moved through the entry corridor at exactly the pace it chose to move, and nothing the security team had on hand would have changed that pace. Dale Kovac was given the full briefing. The evening of day 18. Carol Hines presented it herself in his room with 2 additional senior members. Of the human delegation present, I do not have audio of this briefing. What I have is Carol's written notes from after the fact, filed internally and obtained by me through a method I am going to stop accounting for in this record, because accounting for it every time is becoming uncomfortable. Carol wrote he listened to the whole thing without interrupting, every piece of it, the biological assessment, the behavioral history, the lack of social cognition, the prior conclave incident. All of it. When I finished, he sat with it for a while, then he said, and nobody's ever just sat with them for a while. She added, in her own handwriting at the bottom of the typed note, I told him that wasn't how it worked with the Kreth. He said, how do you know? The arena session for the Kreth claim was scheduled for day 22. Under conclave rules, Dale was entitled to weapons, standard arbitration. Provisions allow the presenting champion any tool, implement, or resource they choose to bring into the chamber. Previous human representatives at the conclave had used legal argument, historical documentation, and in one memorable instance, a scale model of a solar system they had helped terraform. Dale was asked 3 times by 3 different members of his delegation what he wanted to bring. He said the thermos. On day 21 I could not sleep. This is not something I generally write in official documents. It is something I am writing here because I have already decided that this particular file is not an official document. It started as one. It has become something else. I sat at my desk at 2:00 in the morning, and I read the Kreth behavioral reports. Again, all of them, the oldest ones. First, working forward, looking for something, I was not sure what. I found it in a report from a xenobiologist named Owen Marsh, written 18 years ago and never widely circulated because its conclusions were considered speculative and therefore unsuitable for formal documentation. Owen Marsh had spent 4 years studying Kreth behavior in their home system. His conclusion, which his supervisors had called unverifiable, was this: the Kreth are not without internal experience, they are without the tools to process it. He argued that what looked like the absence of fear in the Kreth was not an absence, it was a presence with nowhere to go, that their neural architecture produced states that in any other species would be tagged as overwhelming internal experience, and that in the Kreth these states simply accumulated without release, without language, without the social channels that most species use to discharge what they cannot hold alone. He called them in the reports conclusion the loneliest things in the galaxy. His supervisors crossed that line out. I read the original, uncrossed version. I sat with it for a while. Then I went back to the footage of Dale sitting on the floor at 3:00 in the morning, holding his thermos, keeping company with something that was not in the room. I looked at that footage for a long time. Day 22 arrived. The arena filled faster than it had for any previous session, every seat. Standing observation space in the upper tier, feeds running to 9-star systems, 3 more than the Volca session. I know because I checked. The council called the session to order. Unit 44 entered from the north access. It had to turn sideways at the door frame, the sound of it moving across the arena floor was not a sound most of the beings present had heard at that proximity before. Something in the frequency of it activates the threat response systems of most known species at a neurological level. I know this from the research literature. I felt it. The audience felt it. You could see it. In the footage, a collective shift, 400 beings adjusting their posture slightly. The way things do when something reminds them of what they are. Dale Cavex walked in from the south. Access. Same jacket, thermos. He crossed the arena floor to the center. He looked up at Unit 44. Unit 44 looked down at Dale Cavex. The council read the formal session. Opening, the claim, the registration. The terms. Dale did not appear to be listening to the council. He was looking at Unit 44. Not the way you look at something. Dangerous, the way you look at something. You are trying to understand. He sat down on the arena floor. This got a response from the audience that I can only describe as a collective intake of breath held for several seconds. He sat with his legs crossed and the thermos in his lap, and he looked up at Unit 44 and he waited, clear his throat. Unit 44 did not move. For 4 minutes nothing moved. I have watched this footage many times. I have watched it trying to see what Dale was doing. Because from the outside he was doing nothing. He was sitting, he was looking. He was waiting with the absolute, bone-deep patience of someone who has sat with people in their worst moments and knows that you cannot rush what needs its own time. At 4 minutes and 11 seconds, something changed. I cannot fully account for what changed. The sensors registered nothing unusual. Unit 44 did not move, did not make a sound, did not do anything that would show up in any data stream I have access to. Dale Cavex nodded once, slowly, as if he had just received the answer to a question. He stood. He looked at Unit 44 for another moment. Then he turned and walked back across the arena floor. He reached the south access. He went through it. He was gone. Unit 44 stood in the arena center for 7 additional seconds. Then it turned, walked back to the north. Access went through it. It was gone too. The council, the audience, the 9-star systems watching, all of us. We sat in a silence that lasted almost a full minute. The council lead finally said, formally, into the record, the session is recessed for consultation. That recess lasted 6 hours. At the end of it, the Kreth delegation filed a withdrawal of their territorial claim. No reason was given. The Kreth have no language in the conclave filing system for the category of reason that would have applied. The withdrawal was simply there, filed. Correctly, complete, final. Carol Hintz found Dale in the corridor, outside the vending machines. She said, "What did you do?" Dale said, "Nothing much." She said, "Dale, 9 systems were watching." He looked at his thermos. "It was just scared," he said. Carol said, "It doesn't have a fear response. We have the biological documentation. There is no fear response in the Kreth neural architecture." Dale said, "The documentation's wrong." She looked at him. He looked at her. "The biggest, oldest thing in the room," he said, "and it had never once had anyone sit with it in it." He shook the thermos, found it empty. Looked at the vending machine. "You hungry?" he said. "I think it's past noon." He went to the machine. Carol Hintz stood in the corridor, and did not move for a while. I have that footage too. I have watched it a number of times. I have not decided what it means. I have not stopped thinking about it. The conclave formally closed on day 31. Every claim filed against humanity had been withdrawn. This had never happened before in conclave history, not a near miss, not an approximation. The archival record contains no prior instance of a full withdrawal of every registered claim against a single civilization within a single session. I know because I searched. The official closing ceremony lasted 4 hours. Champions and delegations from 17 civilizations stood in the main hall and made the formal acknowledgement of resolution. It is a ceremony designed for weight and duration and the sense that something significant has been marked properly. Dale Cavax attended in the same jacket. He shook hands with the council lead, said something that made the council lead laugh. I do not have audio of what it was, only the visual, and then moved toward the edge of the room where the catering staff had set up refreshments and spent the last hour of the ceremony talking to the catering staff. His delegation photographed the ceremony. Around him, he talked to the catering staff. I watched him talk to the catering staff. The woman he spoke to longest was named Edith. I know from the staff roster, and she was 61 years old and had worked conclave catering for 14 years. She seemed from the footage initially puzzled by the attention, and then gradually not puzzled at all, the way people stop being puzzled by Dale Cavax when he has been talking to them for a few minutes and they have realized he is actually listening. He held his thermos. He did not get it refilled, he just held it. After the ceremony, in the days that followed, things happened at a pace that outran the official record. The undying blade returned to the Volkai home system and was received without the usual ceremony. This was noted by our satellite monitoring as unusual. 3 weeks later, internal communications from the Volkai High Council, which I am not going to explain how I accessed, showed a proposal being circulated that reformed the terms under which the blade operated, conditions of service, length of commitment, what happened when a champion's tenure ended. The blade had apparently raised some questions. The reform passed. I noted it in my personal file. The voice that sundered moons did not speak publicly for 19 days after the conclave. When it did, it appeared at a Thessian choir internal council session and sang something that had never been sung before, not in a century, not in 3 centuries. It was in a minor key. It was not a war hymn. The Thessian Musicology Archive, which I accessed because at this point I was accessing everything I could find, cataloged it immediately as a significant compositional departure. The archivist who logged it used the word tender in the official description, then went back and changed it to compositionally restrained, and then went back a second time and changed it back to tender. The title in their own language did not translate directly. The closest rendering, the room where someone stayed. I read that title. I sat with it for a while. The Kreth filed no further claims at any conclave. I know this because I track all filings, and their names simply stopped appearing. 3 months after the session, a Kreth survey team, not a military unit, a survey team, which is a category of Kreth activity that had not been recorded in over 200 years, entered 3 of the planets that had been under their territorial dispute with humanity. They were surveying habitat. 6 months later, a formal agreement was reached, not through the conclave, through direct contact, which the Kreth had also not done in recorded history, returning the 3 planets to human management. No explanation was given. The human delegation, when asked by 9 different journalists whether they could explain the Kreth's behavior change, released a 1-sentence statement: "We appreciate the constructive dialogue." That was all they said. Every journalist filed a follow-up request. The delegation did not respond. I read that statement several times, looking for something in it. I did not find anything, which I decided was itself the finding. Owen Marsh, the xenobiologist whose report on Kreth internal experience had been suppressed, received a communication from the Conclave's Scientific Advisory Board 3 months after the session. The communication informed him that his findings had been reviewed and reclassified from speculative to pending formal verification. He had been waiting 18 years for that reclassification. He told a colleague, "I have the message," that he sat with the reclassification notice for a long time before he could bring himself to respond. He used the phrase "sat with it." I noticed things now that I did not use to notice. My supervisor asked me in the 7th week after the conclave closed whether I had completed the final formal assessment, the long one, 60 pages. Standard format, civilizational threat, classification, champion capability, analysis, recommended response posture. Regarding humanity, I told my supervisor I was still working on it. My supervisor said the assessment was 3 weeks overdue. I said I knew. My supervisor said, with the patience of someone managing an archivist who has never been 3 weeks late on anything in 31 years, that they would appreciate the document by end of week. I sat down to write it. I opened the template. The template has 43 sections. Section 1, Champion Physical Capability Assessment. Section 2, Combat Record Analysis. Section 3, Demonstrated Threat Potential. It goes on like that. I looked at the 43 sections. I looked at my notes. I looked at 612 hours of recorded footage, 4 personal audio files, 2 written accounts, 1 xenobiological report that had been suppressed for 18 years, and a song title that did not translate cleanly. I closed the template. I opened a new document. I wrote 3 sentences. Humanity's champion demonstrated no measurable combat capability. Humanity's champion resolved every dispute filed against them. We do not have a category for what he is, and I believe creating one would be a mistake. I looked at those 3 sentences for a while. Then I submitted them. My supervisor sent back a reply within the hour. It asked with increasing formal weight for the full 60-page assessment. I wrote back that I had submitted my complete finding. My supervisor escalated. I tendered my resignation. I want to be clear, this was not an impulsive decision. I have thought about it since, reconstructing the moment, and it does not feel impulsive in retrospect. It feels like the most accurate thing I did in 31 years of archival work. The job is to record and classify what you observe. I had recorded what I observed. I could not classify it, attempting to force it into a classification would have been, at this point, a falsification of the record. I could not falsify the record. I resigned. Dale Kovacs was home by then. I know this because the human delegation's departure manifest, which is a matter of formal conclave record, lists his return travel as a standard commercial flight, the same carrier, same class of service as his outbound journey. He did not take a diplomatic transport. And GT snorts. And GT, he did not accept the formal farewell that three civilizations offered through their delegations. He flew home on a Tuesday. I have a photograph taken by a human press agency, not commissioned, not arranged, just someone with a camera at the right moment of Dale Kovacs in a departure terminal, sitting on one of those low plastic chairs that departure terminals have everywhere in the galaxy. Apparently universal, because no civilization has yet improved on the low plastic chair. He has his bag at his feet, his jacket, his thermos on the seat beside him. He is looking at nothing in particular. He looks like someone who is thinking about something quietly and is in no hurry to stop. I have looked at this photograph a number of times. A neighbor asked him when he got home how the trip was. This is from an interview the neighbor gave to a local journalist, small publication not widely circulated. The journalist asked her what Dale had said. She said he told her it was long, but the coffee was good. She said she asked if he had saved the world. She said he thought about it. She said he told her he had just talked to some people. The journalist asked if she believed him. She said she did not know. She said he went inside and she could see through his kitchen window that he made coffee and sat at the table and just sat there for a while in the quiet. The journalist wrote that it made her feel something she could not name. Exactly. I know what she means. I resigned from my position on a Friday. I had worked there for 31 years, 2 months and 11 days. I cleared my desk. I transferred my active files to my replacement. I kept one thing, a printout of the original champion registration form, ink handwriting on paper, the one that started this. Got pretty good at listening. I have it on my desk now in the apartment where I am writing this. I have been thinking about how to end this account for several weeks. Every version I write sounds like a conclusion, and I do not think this story has a conclusion. I think it has an open door. What Dale Kovacs did cannot be taught from a manual. It is not a methodology. It is not a diplomatic framework or a conflict resolution protocol or a demonstration of civilizational superiority. It is a choice made repeatedly in the same direction: to stay in the room, to not take the exit, to carry the thermos and offer it to everyone and not mind when they say no, to sit on the floor in an arena in front of the oldest apex predator in the galaxy and look at it like it is something you are trying to understand, rather than something you are trying to survive, to be somehow completely certain that understanding it is possible. I think about the Voices song title, sometimes the room where someone stayed. I think about the Blade's thermos, the one that appeared on his desk after he came home. I confirmed this through contact in Vaca internal communications. The Blade did not explain it. His staff did not ask. I think about Owen Marsh's suppressed Report and the word lonely crossed out. By a supervisor who had decided it was too subjective for scientific documentation. I think about Dale at 3:00 in the morning, sitting on the floor with his thermos, keeping company with something not in the room. I think about the dog, 11 years dead, talked about in the present tense. I did not file the flag. I know why. Because the thing you feel when you have been watching Dale Kovacs for 62 days, and you realize you are no longer neutral, that feeling does not belong in a supervisory report. It does not belong in an official classification. It belongs in a room where someone has decided to stay. I have been writing this account for 4 months. I have not shown it to anyone. Maybe I will. Maybe this is me staying in the room. The photograph is on my desk, the thermos in it, silver and dented, sitting on the plastic chair beside him, like a companion that has been dropped from height and simply kept going. I look at it most mornings. I make my coffee. I sit with it.